So I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. This is um, our April, actually our March, that has been moved to April event for the Department of Learning and Teaching, Black Lives Matter Social Justice and Advocacy Series. And this event is called Opt In to Equity. And I am so privileged to work with all of the planning team on this event as we work to bring some of the issues and opportunities for people to dialogue about social justice and ways that we can become social justice leaders and advocates within our communities. So I will now pass it off to Michelle to go through our agenda. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you again, Dr. Jez, and welcome again, everyone, for participating tonight. I'm going to briefly go over tonight's agenda, just let you know that it is very fluid. We do have a tendency of getting really deep into our discussion, so don't get upset with us if we have to adjust our agenda for tonight. So we are going to start with our welcome and land acknowledgement from Hannah, Missouri. We will also go over our solidarity statement. We have an illustrious panel that we are going to talk about how educators in the field are opting into equity. We will also go through a breakout session. We will also have a whole group where we will debrief and discuss our panel discussion. And then we also want to see, as the community participating tonight, how are you opting into equity? Then we're going to go over, we have some resources, and we'll kind of talk about that tonight. We have an author that we are highlighting tonight. And so we might have some books to give out. And then we will also be closing with our illustrious leader, Dr. Joy Spencer. So Hannah, if you would like to welcome us in this space tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. So thank you, Dr. Jez and future Dr. Coleman, because we see you too. Before I kick off, I would just like to say Ramadan Kareem, Ramadan Mubarak to all my Muslim brethren, because we're kicking off that season. But I would like to offer a humble land acknowledgement and a labor acknowledgement. We at USD acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional and stolen territories of the Kumeyaw Nation. As a resident of snowy central Illinois, I acknowledge that I am sitting on the stolen lands of the Miami, Peoria, and Kickapoo peoples. In addition to the land that has been stolen from the Indigenous peoples, I would like to acknowledge the lives that were ended and the cultures that have been eradicated, many of whom are on the verge of annihilation. I also want to acknowledge the Black lives that were stolen from their own lands, including my own homeland, also colonized, and the families that were torn apart, stolen from their homes and forced into serving the will of the white forefathers of this country. The land and institutions from which we all benefit rest upon the stolen lives and lands of both Black and Indigenous people. I invite you to learn more about the ways our current collective comfort, even at our own institution, was created from the suffering of others. And I challenge you to work towards finding tangible ways to restore equity in these communities, to opt in as we are today. We've all learned that the impact and intent do not equally serve those around us. And so today, I'd like us to take a breath, put our hands on our hearts, and send both deep gratitude, apologies, and respect to our elders past, present, and future. And let us all continue to strive for the wisdom and strength as we honor their memories, their traditions, their cultures, and the hopes that guide us to creating a more equitable tomorrow. Thank you.
And then Adon, if you would do our solidarity statement.
Sure. I'm going to start off with the first two paragraphs and then go to the schooling, if that's okay with everyone. The USD solidarity statement and call to action. The PhD in Social Justice program was founded on the belief that education is a conduit which can break the cycle of racism and give a rise to social justice. We, the students and the faculty from the Department of Learning and Teaching in the School of Leadership and Education Sciences at the University of San Diego, denounce and stand in opposition to the dehumanizing police violence and brutality represented by George Floyd's murder and that of countless Black people assaulted and killed by the police. We, as a social justice collective and educational leaders, are committed to uplifting and providing a better quality of life for our community. We are change agents, scholars, activists fighting against the systemic and institutional racism, police brutality, and inequities in education. We believe that we cannot achieve justice regarding racial, educational, political, economic, climate, or any other form of injustice if it stifles on a person's human rights. And injustice against one person is injustice against all. And going down to the schooling section, we challenge all educators to look at their K through 12 and higher education institutions. Does the staff, leadership, and teachers represent the student body? Does it represent the communities around the school, the district, or the county? We can all benefit from diversity, from anti-racist and equitable hiring practice that encourage the hiring of people of color. Thank you.
Adon, thank you so much. So now we would like to welcome our great group of panelists tonight. We are going to briefly go over their bios so we can introduce you to them. So our first panelist is Angela Lee. She is an executive director of equity, diversity, and inclusion for Richardson Independent School District in Texas. Her work stems from over 23 years in education and 21 of them in Richardson Independent School District as a teacher, reading specialist, master teacher, administrator, and staff developer. In her current role, she leads the district's DEI department and provides oversight for ongoing and new equity initiatives. When asked about her personal call to action, Angie readily shares, "Teaching has always been my life's work. Educational equity is my heart's work." Our next panelist is our illustrious leader, Dr. Joy Spencer. She is the interim dean and professor of mathematics education in the School of Leadership, in Education Sciences at the University of San Diego. Dr. Spencer's research investigates the mathematics learning opportunities of African American and other marginalized youth. Her most recent publication, Access, Power, and Participation in Mathematics Classroom, captures the role of observation and advancing equity in teaching and learning in mathematics. Her forthcoming book, No Place at the Table, Anti-Black Racism in Classrooms, will be published by Teachers College Press.
Thank you. Chris is an advocate and Spanish language teacher at Carver High, his alma mater in North Carolina. Despite entering the field of education and teaching in a non-traditional manner, Jeffords has developed a capacity for instruction and student agency by enthusiastically joining a myriad of school and district level initiatives like the Parent Academy at Carver High, where he supported parents and adults in earning their GED. Jeffords leads and secures funding for programs like the Urban Garden Program to promote health and nutrition and food security. Jeffords continues to be involved in the community by joining the area's Task Force for Urban Education, by presenting at multiple conferences to share his insights on teaching and learning, counter narratives on Black and Latino or Latinx students and families. Natalie Guashiri is a graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride, evidently, and Indiana University, where she earned a degree in history. She taught social studies at a historically Black high school, Carver High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Central High in Louisville, Kentucky, for 7 years. Natalie is now currently working for the Kentucky Department of Education as a program consultant for comprehensive support and improvement schools. Natalie's top career goal is to build capacity among educators to make equitable and relatable education a reality for all students. She lives in Frankfort, Kentucky with her husband, Casey, and almost 3-year-old son, Kai.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jez, and welcome, 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 panelists. We are so excited to have you tonight. So we're going to go ahead with the first question, and I am going to ask if each of you could answer this question. And Dr. Spencer, I'm going to start with you first. So the question is, if you can just once again tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in education, and why do you do equity work?
Thank you so much, Michelle. Good to see everyone on this wonderful, beautiful Friday afternoon. It's no better place to be than here. So thank you so much. Just really briefly, to tell you a bit about myself, I am from Los Angeles. I'm a Californian. And I grew up sort of experiencing a lot of inequity myself in schools. And it was, as a very young age, it was really clear to me that what was happening to me in school was going to impact me and my community for the rest of my life. I quickly saw that education was really connected with our life opportunities. So it was not a mystery. And in some ways, maybe it was a gift experiencing a lot of that inequity, because it attuned my ears and my eyes in a different way. So basically, just a little bit about myself. My field is mathematics education, and I graduated from UCLA, really spending a lot of time thinking about mathematics education, how young people learn math, how people learn to teach math, but I think more important to this conversation, how math continues to be a space that is so inequitable and that continues to close off opportunities for young people. So I'm a mathematics education researcher. I'm also the interim dean here and a professor. I'm one of very few full professors in the country right now in the field of mathematics education. Very few African Americans in this field. I'm one of about 7 Black women who are full professors in mathematics education. I'm very proud of that. We have a tight community, and we do a lot of work to really shift what's going on in mathematics education in the country. So why do I do this work? For me, in a lot of ways, I just realized that I wouldn't say that it's personal. It's just that for me, equity work is almost, how can you do education work if you're not addressing equity? I'm not so sure what we would be doing if we weren't doing, I'm wondering, what is the work if that's not what you're doing? Sometimes when I see work that is, that really doesn't attend to these issues, I'm questioning, like, what do these folks see that I'm not seeing? So I think it's more of a question of was there anything else I could do? How could I not be doing this work, I guess is the question, if I really want to impact education, which I do. So I'll stop there. We got a wonderful, beautiful panel. So thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you. Chris, if you wouldn't mind also answering the question, once again, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in education and why you do this work.
Thank you. I'm just honored to be on this panel, first and foremost. Let me say that. I came to teaching non-traditionally, as you eloquently read in my introduction. I'm 50 years old. I came into teaching in my 40s after a life of multiple experiences, and I bring all that to the table when I step into the classroom. So as mentioned, I'm going to jump right into why I do this work is because the places I've been around the world, the things that I've done, the jobs that I've had, coming back to my high school that I graduated from, which is a historically Black high school, was very important to me. It's about having a sense of community. And like Dr. Spencer said, like, if you're not doing equity work, what are you doing, right? It just makes sense to me. And so the big part for me is developing community, right? For me, as a school leader, being part of a community, having the Parent Academy and bringing all those connections together really is a big part of equity work for me. So, I mean, I don't really need to say anything about myself. So.
All right, thank you. Angie?
Good evening, everyone. I am Angie Lee, and I graduated from a historically Black college and university in Oklahoma. It is the only HBCU in Oklahoma, Langston University. And I was recruited right out of college to come to Richardson and teach. And so, I'm one of those people. I've had my life planned out since first grade, probably. I knew that I was going to be a teacher. I never wavered from that. I knew I was specifically going to be an English teacher. And so I went to college. I majored in English education, and that set me on my path, and so I landed in Richardson ISD, which is a suburb just north of Dallas. And so a very diverse district. I was 21 years old, and I started teaching. I taught secondary, so 7th and 8th graders. And, one of the things that I remember just resonating with me very early on is that I was always going to be the teacher in a very diverse school. And I think when I started teaching, there were maybe 3 Black teachers on the campus. And so I realized very early on that I was going to be the teacher on that campus that was just going to love very hard on all of our students of color, because, it was not hard for me to notice very early on the inequities on the campus and across the district. And back then in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of conversation around equity work. We were not having the conversations about equity like we're having now. But it was easy when I think back to those early years. I had really studied Marva Collins, and she was one of those teachers, in Chicago, and I'd read all her books, and her books really resonated with me, and some other authors and educators that I'd studied in college, and everything I read, it seemed, just started coming to life. Everything they said was going to happen. It was like a playbook. I just started recognizing it immediately, and what I was seeing happening to students. And so Michelle will remember we formed a group called TOPS, Teens Offering Peer Support. We were on the same campus back then. And the kids, they just wanted to be in that space with us because they just wanted. And one, you have to ask yourself, how does a kid get to 7th grade and they've never had Black teachers? But that's what was happening, right? And so we were like unicorns to them, and so they just flocked to us. And then we started that organization, and the kids just, they came in droves, and they just wanted to be loved, and they wanted to be heard, and they wanted to know that there was an organization and a space on the campus for them. And so as years, went on, I went into various areas. I went into reading. I became a reading specialist, a master teacher, and then I became an administrator. And as an administrator, just another realm, another layer of education really opened up to me. And equity really became important in the work that I was doing as an administrator, because I realized every single day, it was just so in my face in real time, the inequities. You can kind of hide from what is happening when you're a teacher. You can go in your classroom, that's your lane, you close your door and you do what you need to do for students, and you can kind of live in that bubble. But as an administrator, you have to step out of that bubble, and every day in real time, you're dealing with the inequities. You're dealing with the disproportionality in discipline. you're dealing with the students who are being sent out of classrooms for what they say is disrespect, but then they can't clarify that, teachers can't clarify what they really mean by the disrespectful behavior. You see the kids who are being handcuffed and taken to jail, right out of your off of your campus. And so you see the disproportionality in students who are being encouraged to take advanced level classes and the students who are being discouraged, from taking them, so that we can kind of keep, classes looking a certain way, to be honest. And so you just see the inequity up close and personal on a daily basis. And so when our district decided to create this position, I read about it, honestly, but then I read it and I said, oh, that's the perfect job for me. But at that point, I was real comfortable doing what I was doing. And so I didn't apply. And every single day someone called. I'm being so serious here. Every day someone called and said, Angie, have you seen the position that was just posted? That's really you. I was reading the description and I thought about you. Like, that's everything you talk about. And I think probably that went on for a week. And then at the end of the week, an old principal that I used to work for, Michelle, you'll remember, Charles Bruner, he called. And because in a million years, I would have never thought that I would get a call on my personal cell phone from an old principal that we used to work with, Charles Bruner. And he said, Angie, you need to apply. He didn't even ask, had I seen it? He was just like, Angie, you need to apply for this position. He said, when I think about who should be in that role, everything about it screams, Angie. You've been saying all of these things your entire career. And so why don't you step out and think about doing this? And so that's when I really said, you know what? Okay, there's a reason these people are calling me. Obviously, I've been talking about all of this for a long time to anyone who would listen. And so that's really, I applied for the position. I've been in the position now for, this is year 4. We've grown into it started out with just me, but we've grown into a full department now of 7. And, we've just been able to really do some great work. And the work, of course, is ongoing, but we have been able to really do some great work up to this point.
Okay, thank you. Natalie?
So I'm Natalie. I started teaching because I felt like Black and brown children and poor people deserved good teachers. And so when I was growing up in school, I didn't have any Black teachers, K-12, until my senior year. So if you hear my son, he's standing right here. But I didn't have any Black teachers until my senior year. And so I taught specifically at historically Black high schools, despite the fact that the first school I taught at wasn't the easiest. But I specifically stayed there because I wanted to make sure that my students received good education. They were able to learn things that they might not have learned in some of their other classes. And then I moved to Kentucky and I still taught at a historically Black high school on purpose because, like I said, I believe Black and brown children deserve good teachers. And so now I'm in the position at KDE, Kentucky Department of Education, where I'm the program consultant for comprehensive support and improvement schools. And these are the lowest 5% of schools at each level. And so Jefferson County, which is Louisville, has the largest percentage of these CSI schools. And they've always had the largest percentage of these low performing schools. So my question is, why? Why, despite the fact that we have changed the naming of these schools, they used to be called, I don't know what they used to be called before, but low performance schools are low performance schools, no matter what the federal designation is. But Louisville has always had the same amount of schools that are low performing. So again, the question, what are we doing in education if it's not equity? And that's my question. Like, why do we have this large percentage of schools that are low performing every year? We have not done anything in this state to change that. What are we doing? So that is where I'm trying in my role to try to push out not only evidence-based practices, but evidence-based practices within equity and making sure that these students see themselves, that the teachers who are in these schools that are Black, Brown, are not overworked or overexploited because they're one of a few.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. So I will say that I'm taking over from Raketa because she was having some challenges with traffic to get here. But I will continue with the moderating the panel. I just wanted to mention one of the things we were really excited about with having the four of you here is the fact that you came from different places around the country. And so that kind of leads into why we're asking the next question. Right now, we have this controversy around CRT, and we also have a global pandemic. And one of the things we wanted to really think about or hear about is how these two things happening at this time are really impacting your work in addressing equity. And so, Ms. Lee, would you start us off with your response?
Yes, and so it's been a really tough 2 years. And honestly, I don't know which year has been, the toughest. I think, you ask teachers, and right now they feel like we're still, in the thick of the pandemic and everything that has, happened in our schools. And so it's been difficult, to say that it hasn't been difficult, is not being, truthful. It has been extremely hard. I think, we have these battles going on between the schools and the community, to mask, to not mask. That has been very real for us in our community. When we think about the pandemic and trying to keep both students and staff members safe, and then in trying to do that, just the constant and, the constant never ending criticism, that our superintendent and our teachers, our administrators, teachers are dealing with because of the COVID protocols that were, implemented, and in your mind, you're thinking, gosh, we're just trying to keep everyone safe to the best degree possible. When we're being forced to open schools, right? Because there came a point where in Texas, we had to open our doors, we had to go back, and there was not, really a choice in that matter. And so how do we keep everyone safe? And so that's been a battle. One of the things that I think has been very eye-opening for us is our English language learners and the impact that the pandemic, had on our English language learners. And so when we first all went home and we went, full on virtual, we lost kids, we lost students, we disconnected with them, and that wasn't, intentional. But when you work in a district as diverse as ours, and, we like to say on any given day, there are 96 different languages being spoken in our district. And so, trying to create all of these platforms and make all of these accommodations so that all students can stay connected, I wouldn't consider that a win for us in our district. And probably across the nation, that piece wasn't a win. And so we disconnected with kids. Kids got lost in that. And so, we had to mobilize our student services, and different departments had to merge. And, it became a matter of us still trying to stay as safe as we possibly could, but then out knocking on doors, trying to find kids. Where are our kids? What are the barriers? What's preventing them from, logging in every day, and participating and joining their classes? And so our English language learners really took a hit during this pandemic and everything that we've been through. I think that families really tried to do the best that they could. I think that, and I was one of the ones out there having to knock on doors looking for kids. And I think families did a great job of figuring out, how do I still work, but then the kids are taken care of. And then how do we fit in school? Because, at some point for some families, just to be honest, the school part was not primary, and not primary because they didn't want it to be, but not primary because so many adjustments and so many transitions were happening. And so I can go and knock on one door and that's where the students live. But because mom and dad have to go to work, the student is now living in, West Dallas, with aunt, because that's the only place where the student is going to be taking, supervised every day. And so how do we now get, a laptop and a hotspot, to the students who have had to transition just all over the Metroplex with the different family members? And so that's what we saw, a lot of that. And I think we did a great job of saying we are going to find our kids. We are going to try and pull them back in. And so that was a lot of work, but we were able to find a lot of our kids. But again, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that, there were absolutely students, especially our English language learners, who for a time were just out there, just kind of out there floundering, just because what we recognized in the district is that we have a long ways to go and a lot of work to do to make sure that school is always accessible to all students, regardless of the languages that they come to us with.
Did you have any comment on the critical race theory controversy that's been going on, or?
That is, we are getting hit pretty hard with that in our area. Texas, there's some House bills that have passed, that address critical race theory, or, that were even they started talking about those House bills because of this idea of critical race theory. But, I think that there are people who will say that what we do, is critical race theory, just like they're saying it about all K-12 institutions for the most part. But equity, diversity, and inclusion, and this is what we've really been trying to re-message in our community, is that equity, diversity, and inclusion is not synonymous with critical race theory. Critical race theory is not being taught, to our students. It's not being taught in our schools. And so when we say that we are looking at systems that are inequitable in our schools, we are doing that. We are looking at systems where, we are looking at what are the systems that we have in place that create barriers for students to be successful in our advanced placement courses. What are the barriers that are in place that prevent entry for a lot of our students into our GT programming? How are we doing? How are we doing it? And what are the systems that we haven't looked at in years that have been barriers for students and families in gaining access to a lot of our programming? And so, people will again, say that's critical race theory. And we say that is just good education and good practices. That is just what educators do to ensure that if we have barriers in place that are holding kids back and that are not allowing students to achieve their full potential, because they are missing out on leadership development. They're missing out on advanced academic programming. They are missing out on certain extracurricular, co-curricular activities. Then we have an obligation to look at how we can do better and how we can renorm those practices and systems. And so that's what we're doing.
I love that. I love the recentering the conversation and the messaging. Dr. Spencer, could you talk a little bit about our area here in California?
Sure. So I guess the question is about CRT, how it's shaped anything that's going on
The
right
global pandemic, and then critical race theory controversy and how that's impacting the, equity work.
Sure. Sure. Obviously, the pandemic has upended, but I think with everything that is a negative, you can also think about new opportunities that are out there. The fact that you can get access to knowledge that our students weren't able to get access to before. I run something called STEAM Academies every summer. And last summer, we were able to educate 3 times as many students in our STEAM Academy because we did it virtually. We had a day where we had literally on campus, your parents came by and reached out their car door, and they got this big bundle of resources. And they took that home. And then for the whole 2 weeks of our programming, we said, okay, take out, bag number 1 out of your resource. And then we did all sorts of very rich STEM work from looking at how to build a model of what a coronavirus looks like, to building different doing mathematical modeling and all sorts of things. So there were opportunities there that we would not have had if we, had the pandemic not pushed us to think in that way. So, and it made us really, really work hard and to put us through our paces as educators. Yeah, how do you make a virtual space work for a 12-year-old? So there's more I could say about that, but I think on the CRT piece, I don't mind walking into controversies, to be quite honest with you. I think that one of the big issues, obviously, is that people don't understand what theory is. So because folks are confused, they think that you can somehow teach a theory. Well, no, theory is developed because people sit around and observe what's happening. So CRT it's not, it just is, right? That every moment that a Black person gets recentered in a conversation, CRT is in action. Every moment where a narrative that was a negative narrative about folks of color is now being spoken as a narrative that is positive and speaks of is affirming, then CRT is in action. So CRT just is. We don't, so when I hear folks talk about it, if you could teach it, it's like the very fact that people are coming against it is a representation that it exists. And so these are false conversations that don't make any sense. How are you going to tell me that I cannot reflect on my grandmother, who was a sharecropper, and say that the work my grandmother did was powerful and it shaped the US economy? When I say that, instead of saying that my grandmother was a poor laborer who had no impact, I am enacting CRT. And I'm going to say that. You can't ever take those words out of my mouth. So I will always be enacting the realities of CRT. I think people just need to understand, anytime you teach Black history, anytime you teach Chicano history, anytime you do that, you are engaged in this work. And so I embrace it. Here in California, one of the reasons I stay here, we're super privileged to be in a place where we have historical communities of color, from Oakland to Los Angeles, who just would not put up with any of what some of the stuff that we're seeing. We just absolutely won't put up with it. And so that's very freeing. On the other hand, there is so much inequity in schools in the state of California, from preschool all the way through to graduate school and doctoral degrees. It is untenable. At UC San Diego, which is our local public university, something like 2.3% of the students there are Black. That also is representation that race and racism are alive and well in our state. And the fact that Black youth cannot get through school without being cut off from opportunities by the time they're 10, 11, 12, so they're not even eligible to enter our most prestigious and rigorous universities. So this is a place that I stay because I really see that, here we are, we're a state that never had legalized slavery, technically. We never had legalized segregation, technically. We never had all these things, yet all of the impact of all those things sits right here in the state of California, and it's alive and well. And so I feel like it's such a rich space to do this work. And I'm happy to talk as much about CRT as I can. I love it. I'll stop
I love CRT is. I'm going to have that in my head now. That was Ms. Guashiri, would you like to comment? Global pandemic, critical race theory, what's the impact on your equity work?
Well, CRT is a big thing in Kentucky. Kentucky is the South. It's heavily Republican. It's extremely white. So all of that is going on. Our legislature actually finished their their season yesterday. Yes, last night. So they finished their season yesterday. They did put in our state bill, something about CRT, and something was passed. And so for us at the department, anything we put out, we cannot say anything about CRT. We can't say anything about race. We can't say anything. We can say equity because I put equity out and stuff, but other than that, we cannot go anywhere near it. And so, and for me and my work, I usually publish this weekly called a research bulletin. And in it, I provide evidence-based practices for school systems, teachers, and it can incorporate students, teachers, leaders, and even like family engagement type of activities. And so through that is where I put anything about equity. So I don't do the research. I just gather the research, type it up like a small blurb, and then send it out. Again, similar to like the Annenberg when they do their research briefs, but most of mine have focused on equity. So like Dr. Spencer's work about mathematics, I have sent out bulletins about that. Anti-racist grading, couldn't say racism. So when we send out these things, it has to go through a chain of command. And so I write it up. Mama. Do you want to say hello? Say hello? No. Okay. You see Mr. Jeffords? Yes. Okay. So any of that, it has to be approved. So they ended up changing the name of my research brief, but it still was about anti-racist grading. And so that's how I work around it, is changing some words, but I'm still putting it out there.
I love that. That covert anti-racist teaching, but it's good, and working through your system to bring theory to practice and to educators. It's wonderful. Mr. Jeffords, did you want to respond?
Yeah, these are wonderful examples from Dr. Spencer. Spencer's talking about making it a verb. It's an action. And Ms. Lee was talking about how the systems operate within being inequitable as a holistic map, right? And pulling those things out and showing those and exposing those is like critical work. So I applaud you both for doing that. And for me as a teacher in the classroom, when you said, Ms. Lee, about it's easy to go in your classroom, shut the door, and forget about the world outside of you, it's like all too real. And you see that quite often, right? And in my school, I see there are teachers that are like, I'm just going to shut my door and just, F all this, right? And it's unfortunate, but that does happen. So that stood out to me. Guashiri and I have taught, we teach at, or I still teach, and she did at a historically Black school. And I went to that school. I grew up in that community. I grew up in that neighborhood. So it was important for me, like I mentioned in my introduction, to go back to community and have that connection and have that ability to understand, right? And empathize and sympathize with my community that I grew up in. So as a white identifying male, it's critical for me, especially when you're thinking about CRT, which Dr. Spencer said most folks have zero idea of what theory means or what CRT means. I had someone ask me, they're like, you teach Spanish and Latin American studies. You teach it, you teach critical race theory too? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, can you tell me what that? I'm not sure. I think I've heard of it on the news, but, and he was like, oh no, man, it's like blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I didn't say anything. I just wanted this person to see they had no idea what they were talking about. And that tends to be the thing. But for those legislators who have a marginal idea of what it is, they're the ones passing these bills and these laws and pushing these narratives out there that has real impact. As Ms. Guishiri said, she has to reshift the narrative. She has to reshift the language that's being used. But in the classroom, what I do is I make sure that my students' voice is centered in the activities that we do, that my pedagogy comes from a place of anti-racism, and that basically all my content is filtered through that lens, and that first and foremost, my students are equally, what's the word I'm looking for? They have a voice in my classroom. I'm all about creating counter narratives like Dr. Spencer was talking about. How can we shift? How can we recenter? How can we make this deficit narrative go away, right? How can we pull those sort of critical media literacies out and have our students analyze things that way? So that's what I do when I shut my door and I'm in my own little bubble world, you know. Outside of that, certainly teachers can, in their PDs and PLTs, can discuss things and push and pull and build this sort of community that doesn't always happen, and it's easier to speak about. But that's sort of what I have to do as a teacher in the room. And as far as the pandemic, quickly has made me shift how I assess my students, how I rethink work. What does that look like? What sorts of things can I do to reshift how I graded, right? How I allowed students to demonstrate an understanding of a concept or an idea as in language, right? So the pandemic forced me as an educator to really rethink, reshift how I go about grading student work and assessing student work and giving them, I don't give students a voice. They already have a voice, making sure their voice comes in loud and clear, right? And so part of that is being trauma informed, right? So I've really shored up my ignorance as an educator on how I can be trauma informed from an equity lens. And there's some great resources out there that I've humbly learned from. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you so much. I love that idea of being a compassionate educator who is centering students' voice. Michelle, you have some questions?
Yes, and I just want to say, it's so easy to walk away and shut our doors. I know being in the South, we're catching it every day, left and right. People ask me all the time, Michelle, why are you, you're getting your PhD in social justice. You don't need to be in Texas. And I said, this is where I need to be. Like Dr. Spencer said, I come from people in the South. Me leaving is not what we do. We have struggled and fought. So CRT is everything for me because of the history. And I think that is the piece, is looking at that lens. And for us here in Texas, we have to make sure that we never forget that lens, because we do also have a very rich history, and we have to fight. We have to be out there. And the question is, what are you willing to do? Right? Because it's so easy to walk away. So I appreciate our conversation on that, because it is this recentering, but it's also the not forgetting. It is, that action. CRT is action. So I do appreciate that. So the next question is, and this is for anyone to answer, how do you approach resistance? We talked about that a little, but how do you approach that? And then also, who are your co-conspirators? Who are those people that are helping you do the work, helping you leverage this work? So would anyone like to answer that? Be the first one?
I'll jump out there. There's a lot of resistance in my community right now, for the work that we are doing. We implemented what we call, it started out as racial literacy. We created racial literacy resources, and we rolled it out last year. And you know, initially when we rolled out, we didn't catch anything last year with the initial rolling out, but right, the CRT rhetoric wasn't as big as it, is now. And so, it was just kind of starting at that point. So no one said a word, and so we taught this racial literacy, all year, pre-K-12. And, it went really well. And so then this summer, we were at the height of the CRT rhetoric. Now, House bills are, on the floor and being discussed and about to pass, to counter, what they feel we're doing in public schools. And so I was asked to rebrand it. And so, racial literacy, we changed the name to Connecting Cultures. But still it's the same instructional resources. And so what it is, we talked to our teachers and we asked them, because let me step back a little bit. So as a part of we formed a racial equity committee. And so in Richardson, we've been doing equity work for years now. But one thing that we had to be honest with ourselves about is that we had not fully addressed racial equity. We were still just kind of looking at big picture equity. And we hadn't done anything specific, and really hadn't started to walk that path to really start talking about racial equity. And so we spent a year in a racial equity cohort, just really learning and growing and stretching ourselves. And out of that cohort, we came out with a theory of change that we had produced. And so, we had our theory of change. And one of the things was for us to form a racial equity committee made up of community members and district staff. And so we put out an all call for this committee. And we have about 120 people who said, you know what, I want to engage in this work. And the majority of whom are community members. And so we started meeting. And so we identified 10 areas, and we identified way more than 10, but we narrowed it down to 10 areas that we really wanted to spend a year researching in our district, that in those 10 areas were identified as areas where we had just some real inequity to shore up. And so we ultimately broke out into 10 different subcommittees. The members were able to choose the subcommittee that they really wanted to work with. And so those subcommittees were charged with really looking at the inequities, identifying them, researching them, and then telling the story, the history of that area. So the history of teaching and learning in Richardson ISD. And then really looking at what is a solution? What are some solutions? And the goal for that was that, we're coming up on our new 5-year strategic action plan for our district. And so the goal is to then take that work and fold it into our strategic action plan work so that we can make that work a part of the larger district plan, which is the strategic action plan. And so as we're going through that, one other area that we implemented was the racial literacy, right? And again, we rolled that out, didn't really get any pushback the first year, but going into year 2, all of this CRT conversation is happening across the nation. And so now people start looking at the district like, wait, okay, they passed an equity policy. Now we know last year they were doing something called racial literacy. Now there's this racial equity committee, and it just became too much for, our community. And so we just got bombarded quickly and with the pushback, and the pushback was real. And so this year going into it, so how are we dealing with resistance? We changed the name Connecting Cultures. And I heard someone say earlier, you start changing words and taking out words. Let me tell you, that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. When you start trying to replace words and change titles, it doesn't work. What that turns into is that now you're not being transparent. And so the more we tried to counter that resistance in that type of way, the more it gave people room to say, oh, you're not being transparent. They're trying to hide it from us now. And we weren't trying to hide it. We were just trying to find a middle ground, so we thought. And so, so then to counter the transparency, we're like, okay, well, these instructional resources are viewable, come view them. And so we held, all day events where they could come and they could view the instructional resources. And now we're just at the point, because it has not stopped. We haven't been able to do anything, because the reality, Michelle, is that there are people who do not believe in equity for all students. There are people who they do not want equitable outcomes. They do not want equitable access. There are people who believe in order for some to have more or to gain access, you're taking something from their children, or you're rewriting history, or whatever, the million things that people like to say. And so, right now we're countering the resistance. We are trying to stay within what the law says that we can and cannot do. And we're still pushing forward. We're not going to stop. We've decided that providing equity for students is what needs to be done. Removing barriers for students is what needs to be done. And we're going to continue to do that. And so, for example, our professional learning, we used to have it where it was all of our staff, they're required to do 18 non-duty professional learning hours. 2 of those hours had to be in the area of cultural competence. Well, now we can't compel, staff to certain types of professional learning. And so it's no longer mandatory, but we still offer it, and we have our disclaimer. Race is going to be talked about in this session. If you attend this session, you are opting in to conversations about, race and whatever else that particular workshop is going to be about. And so, I think in the 4 years that I've been in the district doing this work, we've done a great job with our professional learning with our teachers and our staff members. And so now that's how we are resisting, because the teachers want it. So the teachers are still coming. They're still learning. They still want to grow. And, I've been saying all year, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so these 4 years, they've been a journey of just bringing awareness, and teachers and staff members really leaning in and listening and wanting to understand. And now they've seen it and they can't unsee it. So in the face of everything we're dealing with in our community, our teachers continue to show up and they continue to ask for more. And so that's really what keeps me encouraged for this work. That's really what keeps me going, because our teachers, they show up, they've seen it, and so they refuse to unsee it, and they are wanting to do what's best for kids. And they now believe and they know that equity is what's best for kids. And so, and they're making believers out of their next door teacher neighbor friends. And they're helping, and they're having these conversations with their administrators. They're having the conversations with their counselors. And it's kind of that each one reach one, right? And so the more they learn, the more they're sharing. And so we're just building our co-conspirators and our ally base that way. And, and now we have students who are talking about what they're learning, and we have student programming. We have a lot of great student programming, and they're going out and they're talking to their parents, and with the Connecting Cultures, the instructional resources and those lessons that are happening in the classes, the parents are reaching out and they're saying, tell me more about this. My student came home today and we've had this conversation. Can I come up and preview the lesson so that I kind of now know where we're going and what to prepare my own self for. And so the more the students are learning, the more the parents are learning. And so now what we're seeing in the community, we've had a PAC that has formed in the community, and so now we have community members who are joining together to say, we're not going to let equity go away in this district, because there are those of us in the community and we want it. And so now we see some organizing happening in the community from parents who are saying, this has been great for our kids, and we want it. And just because you don't get to take it away from ours.
I love that. So we have just one last question that we're going to ask the panel, and then we've got a little group activity as well. And we just wanted you to think about, and I think you did a beautiful job hitting on this, but can you describe the joy you experienced from doing this equity work? So and any of you can decide if you want to share first.
I'll just say that. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I really appreciate being in this position. It is a statewide position. So the things that I'm doing goes out to the entire state. So I appreciate the fact that I'm in this position and able to at least send it out. I don't know if people are looking at it. I don't know how many people are actually taking it seriously, but the fact that I'm in the position to actually try to, implement this idea, I appreciate that.
I guess what I was going to say is in the height of all this CRT nonsense that goes around, which has real negative impacts on people, even though I say it's nonsense, right? I went and got a master's in what's from UNC Charlotte in their urban education program. And we all know when you say the word urban, it's a euphemism for, right? So we can dissect that. But it was my commitment to bringing that knowledge back through a social justice lens back into my school building to offer professional development. And it brings me joy to help other educators humbly offering what knowledge base and the experiences that I bring to the table, and just being a source for other educators. Because a lot of times folks really have, like Ms. Lee said, a basic understanding of what equity work looks like, right? And a lot of times they're just content with doing surface level stuff. And if we're really going to make system-wide changes at the classroom level, then we have to be fearless leaders in this, right? And sometimes that'll require it's a balance in the equation of how much are you willing to push, how much are you willing to resist when it comes to your job being on the line, right? A lot of times people don't talk about how people want to do the work, but they have fear of doing the work, right? And then so you need to measure yourself and see how much am I willing to push back? I'm gonna look at my positionality and what can I do from that? What can I bring to the table there? So it's really been a blessing and honor for me to be able to be a leader at my school and talk about Latinx counter narratives, helping our emergent bilingual students, and offering PD to help other educators in the building to really develop their own lens, take that and grow, right? So that's my joy.
I think I'll say, my joy is just the teachers and the staff members, in the face of all of the opposition that we, have received, who are committed to it, and that encourages me. They reach out, they want more. We just had a pride training last night. We do training, to center our LGBTQ plus students as well for staff members. And our attorney general in the state of Texas now, Austin ISD, they're now being sued for their Pride Week activities. And, so in the East, but even though they know this and we're in the midst of those types of things happening, we did our pride training and the teachers are just tweeting out. They're like, we're going to learn, we're going to grow, we're going to show up tomorrow and serve all of our students even better, than we did the day before. And they want it. And so that keeps me encouraged. And we lost our superintendent in December, largely because of COVID protocols and our equity work. There's a lot that goes into why she left, but largely because of COVID and the pushback around our equity work and COVID, and so her COVID protocols. And so I was feeling guilty. I was feeling like, gosh, did I contribute to that? Did we do too much? Should we have pulled back? And one day she called and she said, and I hadn't talked to her since she left. And one day she called and she said, I just feel like I need to call you and say, you better not feel guilty about anything that has happened. And she said, I'm no longer there, but she said, I don't regret anything we did. And she said, and I stand on that. It's good work. It's necessary. We did what's right for kids. And so do not feel guilty. You continue to lead forward. And if you're feeling guilty, you put that aside right now. I'm fine. I will be fine. And I stand on everything that we accomplished. And so I needed to hear that because I had lost my joy, and so I needed that guilt I needed to release that guilt. And when she called, that did that for me. And so now, again, I'm looking at our staff and I find joy because they have rallied around us to say, no, this is necessary, and we're here, and we want to continue to move forward, and we want you to continue to lead us forward. And so I find joy in that.
Is there still time for me to go, or did you want to go to the next?
Yes, please.
Oh, sure. So on the question of joy, I think this has been a difficult season for joy, but I think that's perhaps what joy is why it is something very different than happiness. It persists even in difficulty. Mm-hmm. And so this has been a season that's really tried my joy a lot. But some of the things that have been really helpful for me, like so many of you all have said, is having students come to me and say, the work you're doing matters. It was seen, it was appreciated. I have a doctoral student here who I had lunch with the other day, and she said, one time I heard you speak, and she said, you talked about growing up. I grew up in South Central LA, in the middle of everything that South Central LA became infamous for. And she said, to hear you reflect on that as someone who is the dean of our school, she said, I never thought in my wildest, I just never thought that I would have a dean to say that, because usually the folks, you barely even get a Black teacher, let alone someone who's going to be able to invoke and talk about what it was like to have to be scrappy and have to be on a city bus and have to put your necklace inside because, it's going to get taken, or just the realities of growing up like that. And so for her to even think, to be able to even voice that sort of thing mattered, it means so much, because it's not just that it's not just being Black, it's the experience that being Black has brought you. And I think maybe for her, she realized that when I'm speaking, I'm speaking from that my perspective is just, I know what it's like to struggle. Like, I get that. And I'm the programming that I'm doing, the work that I'm doing, I think I'm doing it from a space of lack, a space of like, I get it. Like, I get what it's like to have not $1 in your bank account. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. So when I'm working with my students, the work that I'm doing to help educate faculty, because inequity is alive and well in higher education. And a lot of the work I've been doing over the last couple of years has been really working to help educate faculty. And of course, there's been a huge pushback, and it's been very painful what has happened. But on the other end, I also have no regrets, because the truth is you only get one time to do this work. And I go to sleep very happy. I go to sleep very, very pleased with everything that I have done. I don't go to sleep feeling like, oh, I wish I had it. No, I was like, you know what? You only get one shot. And so if you go down for something good. And that is what I have experienced. The only thing I would say is support the people who are on the front line, because you might not see all that they're walking through, but they're walking through the fire. And so just like, like you're saying, Angela Lee, Miss Lee, thank you so much for your words. And thank you that you felt that for your superintendent, because she's in the fire. And when you're a woman of color, when you're doing all those things together and doing equity work, you have 10,000 daggers in your back at any given moment, period. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what anyone thinks. If they are in your back and they're coming at you, and you got to just, I live here in California. I do a lot of hiking. I have to. If I can't see something beautiful from time to time, it's going to break me down. So you have to keep encouraging one another. Keep looking at the folks who are on the front line. If all you do is send a text that says, I see you, that's it. You don't know what that might mean, because you don't really know, but you can guarantee they're going through a lot. So this has been a season of really leaning in and reclaiming my name. My first name is Joy, and really reclaiming and trying to really find that joy again. And just being content that the work I'm doing matters.
Well, as somebody who is part of your department, I will say that you have done a lot of amazing things for the School of Leadership and Education Sciences. Natalie, did you want to share anything as before we move on?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have Adon go through our norms real quickly, and then we'll break out into smaller groups to have a little discussion.
Thank you. So our discussion norms. Let's start off with, first, we will listen with intentionality and be okay with awkward silences. We will speak our truth and share authentic and use I statements. We will respect confidentiality, experience and lean into discomfort. Be mindful of time so that we can all share. Recognize that this is unfinished work. Recognize your communication style and examine your own assumptions and perceptions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to move us into breakout groups now. If you can just give me 1 second to catch up into what I need. And all right, I'm going to open the rooms now.
As you go into the rooms, I would just like you guys to just have a discussion around takeaways from the panel discussion. And I'm going to put a Menti in the chat that's basically just kind of giving your thoughts or reflection on how you can opt into equity as well. So if you don't mind having that discussion together.
All right, are we ready? Okay.
Hello?
Hey.
Okay, sorry. It seemed extremely quiet. When I know that I'm the one that stated silence is okay, but I wasn't sure if my computer was having errors. So we'll wait a bit until
you look a little blurry. You look a little blurry, Don, but you sound just fine.
Yes, the whole blurry thing is I am in my partner's kid's room, and so I don't want to embarrass the kid with all his toys around him. So I just use the blurry filter, but I should be clearer now. Can you see me now? Okay. Sorry, there's so many things around here that I don't want to embarrass the kid. So I think this is my portion of the event today. So first and foremost, as you can see, we have a book giveaway, and this is sponsored by the Johnson's Fellows here at USD. And Dr. Stoles, if you're still here, she is one of the proponents who encouraged me to make this happen. So just a little bit of background on the Johnson's Fellow. The Johnson's Fellows is It's part of the SOLS here at USD, and it's fortunate to have a young and a thriving history with the school. Since 2015, the Johnson's Educational Fellows Program has supported teachers in the San Diego region, both from public and Catholic schools, through professional development that focus on how they, as teaching professionals, can best support students with learning disabilities in general ed classrooms. And in year one of the Johnson's Fellow Educational Program, 9 K-3 general education teachers are served as fellows, attending 2 featured speaker keynotes and workshops at USD to build strategies for working with students with disabilities. And at the end of the year, the fellows shared stories on how the program impacted their learning. Currently, we're about to start, I believe, year 6 or 7. Dr. Stolz, can you clarify if it's year 6 or 7?
I believe this is going to be year 7.
Yes, and we have now signed up around 30 teachers, but there's still we still have space for more to join us if they're interested. We will be doing a kickoff session from June 20 to 24th, and there is a stipend for anyone who's interested. But more to the point, for today, the Johnson's Fellows has graciously given us funding to provide books for everybody here that attended, including our panelists. And the book that we're handing out is Nelson Beats the Odds, which is written by Rodney Sidney III. And the reason why we're handing out this book is because this book, of course, exemplifies the importance of education and serving the community. A little bit of a synopsis of the book is Nelson used to think that school was all about playing around and talking with his friends. When Nelson learns that he has been placed in special education, he fears of being teased. Consequently, he keeps his learning disability and ADHD diagnosis a secret. With the encouragement of his parents and assistance from Mr. T, his special education teacher, Nelson pushes the boundaries and discovers his potential. Nelson Beats the Odds is an inspiring story that celebrates friendship, resilience, and empowerment. Striking illustrations to give life to Nelson Beats the Odds, while the author's story is perfect for students diagnosed with learning disabilities or mental disorders. And I read this book, and it's one of those stories that I enjoy because it's all about like that one educator that makes an impact in our lives. And hopefully everybody here has had one or many educators who's made an impact. And so because of that, I feel that it encompasses the spirit of today. And I'm trying to post a chat, but everybody here is going to get a book. And I'm just trying to provide the link. I just can't seem to find the chat. So, oh, there we go. I think it's because I am in moderating mode. So if you are interested in getting a copy of the book, the link has been provided in the chat. All you need to do is give us your email, your name, and your address, and they will be shipped out to you promptly. And with that, I want to thank everybody for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Spencer, did you want to give some closing remarks? And then we just have one more announcement, and we will end at that. So.
Sure. Thank you. What an honor. You never give a professor the closing remarks because they just go on and on. No, but thank you all. It's been a real honor. I'm just going to share just a bit of my thinking as we close out. You know, this idea of opting into equity is near and dear to my heart. And I really believe that we have to really think very hard about the work. You consider work before you do it. And then once you consider it, you just do it because you know that that's what you need to do, but you have to count the cost. So just to share a few things, I want to, since I have the EDSJ program, the EDSJ students here, I want to talk a little bit about the Education for Social Justice doctoral program, which so many of these students who are on this call are from. And I want to share just a little bit about its history. It seems hopefully you'll understand why I'm sharing this by the time I finish these comments. But I've been at USD for about 15 years, and it was very clear when I was here that people called out a lot of things. They called out multiculturalism and language, and even the word diversity. But there was very little work being done around inequity and race. And it was really clear that it was missing, but that race had such deep and profound impact on the life of our students, the lives of our students, and the lives of the young people that they were going to teach and work with. And so for years, I would talk to some co-conspirators and say, look, we need to have a doctoral program in education here in Southern California that centers, that says that it's not an afterthought, it's not one class, but the very center of it is us being able to call out and speak to and interrogate deep issues that we all see. Just because you don't pretend something isn't there doesn't mean it's not there. And so the Education for Social Justice program was started with intentionality. And I think that's really the word I hope people leave with this evening, is this notion of intentionality. We cannot hope that things will somehow get better. We cannot simply sort of play around the fringes and somehow inequity gets broken. There's got to be intention. And so there's a few things we did and we're still doing with intentionality in this doctoral program, because we thought hard about what would it mean to create a program where students who were from marginalized identities could thrive. That was a question that we centered. What would it mean to make sure that students could complete a dissertation? So what would it mean if someone who is, let's say, comes from a marginalized community, or their first language isn't English, or they have children or caring for parents? What would it mean for us to create a doctoral program where that student could thrive? So in everything we did, there has been intentionality. Now we're in our third year. We don't have any students who've actually graduated yet, but I can tell you with certainty that by being intentional, not by pretending race doesn't exist, not by pretending that it's not difficult to be a woman in education, that you don't get to what we're doing by pretending. You get by being head on and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. And this is why we're going to do it. And when it doesn't work, we're going to go back and we're going to rethink it. And that intentionality, that centering of equity and centering of justice in everything that we do is what is making this, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, because, what can you say about something you helped to found? It feels a little prideful to say that. But what I'm saying is that that's part of what is the secret within the work that we're doing. That same intentionality is the kind of intentionality we have to take into schools, K-12, that we have to take when we counsel, we have to take when we're in hospitals, justice departments, intentionality. I believe that most youth that I encounter, if they are youth of color, that they have experienced particular things. They've probably experienced some discrimination. They may be coming from a context where maybe their parents didn't have the highest level of education. Not because I'm deficit in my thinking, but because I can look at the statistics and tell you. So I take that intentionality and I program and I speak and I work from that place. And that's how you do the work of equity, is by understanding what it is, leaning in and doing it, not ignoring it. Racism is real. Race is a real construct in America. It is. Sexism is real. Women actually experience the things that we read about. Those are real. So if I'm going to create a program where women can thrive, I've got to speak to it and I've got to see it, not ignore it. And so I'm hoping that as you're opting into equity, that you are opting into the truth, right? That you opting in is about being truthful and about listening to people's stories and about acknowledging and then programming and moving from that space. I'm also, as I leave you all, I want to wish you endurance. I want to pray that you have joy for the journey, because it takes a lot of joy. I'm hoping that you have companions in the work that you do. And if you don't, you can call me and I'll be a companion for you in this work. I'm praying that you also have peace, that when you have done the work that you know is right, that you can lay down and sleep that you can go and watch your television program because you know you've done what you're supposed to do. So thank you so much for this invitation. It has been just absolutely wonderful to spend my Friday evening this way, and wishing you everything that you're dreaming of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spencer. So this is our very last slide, and it is just an opportunity to hear about our upcoming event, which will be on Friday, April 29th. In this event, we'll be highlighting resources in our community. We are really excited to share all of the amazing things that are happening. Just a reminder, please fill out the form for Adon so that he can send you that book. And I actually, Dr. Stoltz had brought that author to USD a few years ago, and I bought all of the books that he had brought there. They are really fantastic, and I give them out as gifts. So, please send your information so that Adon can send it to you, and you can also, share that book with the community at large. Thank you again for your time and being in this space with us tonight. Have a great night.
See you all.